Iran's economy is collapsing, and you see it everywhere. In homes, on the street, in the anger boiling over. In city after city, protests have turned violent. Things are burning, barricades are rising, and the regime looks shaken. Iran's current reality is very messy. Prices are soaring, inflation is out of control, and the currency has lost much of its value. More than 40 million Iranians now live below the poverty line, struggling just to buy food or pay rent. Survival has become a daily calculation, and that pressure has exploded into some of the biggest protests the country has ever seen. So as unrest spreads, let's take a closer look at how Iran's economic freefall pushed an entire nation to the edge. The truth is, this is a country that was never meant to be poor. It sits on enormous natural wealth, with vast energy reserves, fertile land, and a young, educated population that should be driving real growth. On paper, this should be a prosperous nation. But that wealth never reaches ordinary people. Instead, it's burned on repression at home, power games abroad, and an ever-expanding security state. So the country stays stuck. Not because it has to be, but because it's kept that way. Poverty isn't some tragic accident. It's the result of choices made at the very top, again and again. So now let's dig into the biggest problems crushing Iran's economy and dragging it deeper into the mud. The Iranian rial sits right at the center of this collapse. Back in 2018, $1 cost about 70,000 rials. Today, it's closer to 1.5 million. That is not a small drop. That's the currency losing about 20 times its value. And for ordinary Iranians, that kind of collapse turns everyday life into a constant gamble. A bag of rice that once cost 100,000 rials now goes for nearly 2 million. Wages haven't come close to keeping up. Most workers earn somewhere between 40 and 60 million rials a month. With today's exchange rate, that works out to roughly $30 to $40. That barely covers rent and food, and sometimes not even that. The central bank tried to take the edge off by printing more money, but that only made things worse. Inflation took off and never really came back down. It's been stuck above 40% year after year, quietly eating away at whatever people have left. Food prices have been hit the hardest. And on top of that, imported goods like phones or car parts have effectively become luxury items, completely out of reach for most families. And this isn't just about numbers or exchange rates, it's about parents skipping meals so their kids don't have to. As prices keep climbing, jobs are disappearing. On paper, unemployment in Iran sits at around 10%, but that number doesn't tell the real story. Among young people, nearly 1 in 3 can't find work. For young women, it's even worse, with more than 40% locked out of the job market entirely. At the same time, entire industries are also crumbling. Take the car sector, once a point of national pride. In 2011, Iran was producing around 1.4 million vehicles a year. By 2025, that number had fallen to barely 1 million, hit hard by sanctions that cut off parts, technology, and export markets. In cities like Tabriz, factories have gone quiet, leaving skilled workers with nothing to fall back on. And it's not just big industry. Small businesses are being crushed by inflation. In places like Isfahan, cafes and local shops are shutting their doors because people simply don't have money to spend. The private sector, which should be creating jobs, is instead suffocating under red tape and a lack of access to bank loans. And when one business closes, the damage spreads. Workers lose their income, suppliers lose contracts, and entire communities lose the little stability they had left. All of this desperation has pushed people into a shadow economy. With sanctions making legal trade almost impossible, the black market has exploded. And this isn't just small-time hustling. Huge smuggling networks, often tied to powerful elites, now move everything from medicine to baby formula across borders with Iraq, Turkey, and Pakistan. So the same people running the country are now moonlighting as international baby formula smugglers. That's just crazy. But anyway, if you're enjoying this masterclass on how to tank a resource-rich economy, then clearly you're here for the full tragedy. Subscribe, because we are just getting to the part where it gets even more shocking. This smuggling is a massive operation, worth an estimated $10 billion a year. Fuel smuggling is one of the biggest pieces of it all. Iran's gasoline is heavily subsidized, so it gets siphoned off and sold across the borders in places like Pakistan for huge profits. In border towns like Zahedan, it's common to see trucks stacked with jerry cans, weaving around patrols and checkpoints. The currency black market is just as chaotic. The government still pretends there's an official exchange rate, but no one believes it. In Tehran's Grand Bazaar, street dealers trade dollars and euros at real-world prices. sometimes double or even several times the official rate. That gap only pours more fuel on inflation and completely erodes trust in the system. Then there's the informal economy. Street vendors, unregistered taxis, small traders doing whatever they can to survive. These jobs keep people going, but there's no stability. One day you make enough to eat. The next day, you don't. It's a fragile way to live, and it's becoming the norm for more and more Iranians. The shadow economy keeps millions of Iranians afloat, but there's another hidden world that's grown even faster. One built entirely on digital money. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have become a way to get around sanctions and keep trade moving. For the government and wealthy insiders, crypto has reshaped parts of the economy, even if most ordinary citizens can't touch it. By 2025, Iran was moving over $1 billion through crypto transactions, mostly with countries like Turkey, China, and Russia. For businesses cut off from global banks, this is not a small change. This is survival. The government even legalized crypto mining back in 2019, turning cheap electricity into a magnet for miners. Today, mining alone consumes nearly 8% of Iran's power, enough to light entire cities. But that power comes at a steep price. Blackouts hit homes and factories regularly, and in cities like Mashhad, residents have gone days without electricity, while miners overload the grid. And even if you want to get involved in crypto, most Iranians can't. With the rial collapsing, buying even a small fraction of Bitcoin is out of reach. Mining rigs and trading platforms are constantly controlled by state-linked firms or wealthy insiders, leaving ordinary citizens on the sidelines. Volatility adds another layer of risk. In 2025, a single crash wiped out more than $200 million in Iranian crypto holdings. The government has tried to tighten control, shutting illegal mines and jailing traders, while U.S. sanctions now target wallets linked to Tehran. So yes, crypto provides a lifeline and a way to bypass sanctions, but it's no cure for the larger crisis. It is a fragile pillar holding up an economy already on the brink, and it leaves the majority of Iranians behind, struggling to survive in a system they cannot influence. Millions of Iranians are surviving however they can, through smuggling, street vending, odd jobs, and informal trading. But the deeper question is obvious. How does a country swimming in oil end up this close to economic collapse? Well, the answer is pretty blunt. Iran built its entire system around oil, and when that wealth stops reaching ordinary people, everything else begins to crack. Iran holds the world's fourth largest oil reserves, more than most countries could ever imagine. As of January of 2026, it's pumping close to 3.2 million barrels a day, almost back to pre-sanction levels. In September of 2025 alone, exports surged to 2.1 million barrels a day, nearly 64 barrels in a single month, bringing in around $4 billion. But almost all of that oil went to one place, China, and it was sold at steep discounts, shipped through shadow fleets just to keep the cash coming in. And now, even that lifeline is under pressure. In October of 2025, Washington moved to sanction Chinese terminals and refiners, directly targeting Iran's biggest remaining buyer. At the same time, oil prices slipped to around $70 to $75 a barrel, well below the $80 benchmark Iran had built its budget around. Every dollar short translates into billions lost. The government expected roughly $20 billion in oil revenue for 2024 and 2025, but sanctions and discounts have left it far behind. And even when oil money does come in, it rarely reaches the public. A large share is funneled into military spending and regional allies like Hezbollah and Lebanon, instead of being invested at home. That means fewer resources for schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and industry. Money flows outward, while daily life inside Iran keeps getting harder. This is the trap Iran is stuck in. Oil is both a lifeline and a prison. For decades, the country doubled down on crude while the rest of the world moved on. Countries like South Korea built manufacturing and technology sectors. Iran didn't. There was no serious backup plan. So when sanctions hit, there was nothing else to carry the economy. Factories that could have been producing cars, electronics, or machinery shut down because they couldn't access parts, financing, or foreign markets. Even the sectors that showed promise never had space to grow. Tech startups in Tehran expanded about 20% in 2023, but without funding, global access, or reliable infrastructure, they stayed small and fragile. Tourism could have brought in billions. Iran is filled with world-class historical sites, from Persepolis to Isfahan. When sanctions briefly eased in 2016, around 2 million tourists visited. By 2024, that number had collapsed to roughly 500,000. Without new industries, the economy became a one-legged stool. When oil wobbles, everything else falls with it. Look no further than Venezuela for a chilling parallel. Once Latin America's richest oil nation, it now stands as a warning of total economic ruin after years of mismanagement, corruption, and crippling sanctions. Hyperinflation peaked at over 1 million% in 2018. The bolivar became worthless paper, and more than 7.9 million people have fled, as poverty engulfed up to 96% of the population at its worst. Oil production crashed, from 3 billion barrels a day to under 500,000 at its lowest. Factories shut, shelves emptied, and protests turned deadly. If Iran doesn't change course soon, it risks the same fate. A resource curse, turning vast wealth into widespread despair, mass exodus, and national collapse. And when the world turns its back, that oil lifeline tightens even further. Sanctions from the United States and its allies have squeezed Iran's ability to sell crude and trade freely, turning a resource-rich country into one struggling to pay its bills. Revenues fluctuate, discounts eat away at profits, and every new restriction tightens that chokehold. Sanctions didn't just hit oil. They isolated Iran from the global economy entirely. Cut off from international banks, even basic trade becomes a maze of workarounds. Foreign companies pulled out after 2018, including European car makers that once employed thousands. Investments dried up fast. Before sanctions, Iran attracted about $5 billion a year in foreign capital. Now it's under $1 billion. That isolation crushed entire industries. Steel, textiles, and manufacturing once employed millions. Today, many of those factories sit idle. In Shiraz, carpet and textile workshops that once exported worldwide now stand silent. The government tries to plug the gaps with subsidies, but it's like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The money disappears into inefficiency, corruption, and political priorities, while ordinary people are left scrambling. In the end, Iran's oil wealth is real, but it no longer functions as a foundation. It's a pressure point, and for millions of Iranians in 2026, that wealth feels less like a blessing and more like a mirage, always visible, never reachable, as the economy continues to fracture beneath them. Despite sitting on vast oil and resource wealth, families across Iran are struggling to survive as shortages mount. The most urgent is water. Years of mismanaged dams and irrigation, combined with rising temperatures and declining rainfall, have left rivers drying up and farmland turning into dust. In 2025, rainfall fell 40% below average, pushing reservoirs to critically low levels. Khuzestan, once the country's breadbasket, has seen crop yields collapse by more than half. Seeds and fertilizer now cost 3 to 4 times more than they did just a few years ago, leaving farmers unable to plant or harvest. Many have abandoned their land altogether, migrating to cities like Avaz, where already fragile infrastructure is buckling under the weight of displaced families. The impact reaches far beyond the countryside. With less water, agriculture falters, food supplies shrink, and prices climb. Families are forced to ration staples like rice and cooking oil, while meat has become a rare luxury. Rural collapse feeds urban overcrowding, and resentment spreads quickly as communities struggle to absorb the influx of displaced farmers. Tehran is now staring down what officials call day zero, when water supplies could run critically low. Reservoirs are shrinking, taps run dry for hours at a time, and emergency tanker trucks deliver what little water is left. The government has even floated plans to move the capital, forcing families to give up their homes and whatever security they still have. For ordinary Iranians, it feels like the ground is disappearing beneath them. Drought, abandoned farmland, and forced relocations are piling pressures onto households that were already struggling. Agriculture falters, food prices soar, and frustration spills into the streets. Housing adds another layer of stress. A one-bedroom apartment in Tehran now costs half the average salary. Wages have barely budged since 2020, while rents have tripled. Young people cannot move out, and many are delaying marriages or putting off starting families. Education, which should be a way out, offers little relief. 40% of Iranian youth have university degrees, but most end up in dead-end jobs. Engineering graduates drive taxis, and women face even steeper barriers, with only 14% participating in the workforce. Rural communities are left behind, with crumbling roads, few clinics, and schools that cannot meet demand. The gap between city and countryside grows wider, and resentment spreads quickly. Energy shortages make everyday life even harder. Despite enormous oil and gas reserves, Iran faces chronic power gaps. In 2024, a 350 million cubic meter gas shortfall caused blackouts and forced factories to shut down. Winter left homes in Mazandaran cold for days. Industries from cement to steel stopped production, costing thousands of jobs. The root of the problem lies in years of underinvestment and sanctions blocking new technology. Iran burns most of its gas domestically, leaving little room for export or industry. All this means their economy is taking a big hit. And while families sit in the dark and factories shut their doors, billions are sent abroad. Iran funnels $1.6 billion each year to Hezbollah, Hamas, and militias in Iraq. And since 2011, Nearly $50 billion has gone to prop up Syria's government. That money could be building schools, hospitals, or keep food affordable at home. But instead, it leaves the country. For citizens already freezing in their homes and watching jobs vanish, it feels like betrayal layered on top of hardship. The anger isn't just about shortages anymore. It's about a government that has chosen foreign wars over its own people. Speaking of choices, corruption is one of the main reasons Iran's economy can't escape the crisis. Oil money should be the country's safety net, the thing that cushions hard times. Instead, much of it vanishes long before it ever reaches ordinary people. The system isn't designed to serve the public. It's designed to protect insiders. And every time the economy takes a hit, that imbalance makes the damage worse. A big part of the problem starts with how oil revenue is handled. Much of Iran's oil is sold through shadow fleets, middlemen, and opaque deals. That secrecy makes it easier for well-connected figures to skim off profits. Instead of being invested in schools, hospitals, or infrastructure, billions are redirected into military spending and regional allies. On paper, the state earns money. In real life, ordinary Iranians see almost none of it. The gap between national wealth and daily reality just keeps widening. At the center of the system sits the Revolutionary Guard. It doesn't just enforce the regime's power, it also dominates large parts of the economy. Construction, energy, telecoms, transport, all of it runs through companies linked to the Guard. Contracts go to loyalists, not the most capable bidder. That squeezes out private businesses and scares off foreign investors. And because the Guard is both a military force and an economic empire, its privileges are effectively untouchable. Cracking down on corruption would mean confronting the very institution that keeps the regime in power. Subsidies make things even messier. Fuel, food, and electricity are heavily subsidized, supposedly to help ordinary families. In practice, the system is riddled with loopholes. Connected businessmen buy at subsidized prices, then resell at market rates for huge profits. What's meant to ease the cost of living turns into another way to reward loyalty. The budget bleeds money through inefficiency, while households still struggle to afford the basics. The banking system doesn't help either. Iran's banks are weak, politicized, and often used as pipelines for insider money. Businesses without the right connections find it nearly impossible to get loans. Meanwhile, favored firms enjoy easy credit and generous terms. With sanctions already cutting off Iran from global finance, corruption inside the banking system turns domestic credit into a broken tool, unable to support real growth. And the reason this corruption is so hard to uproot is simple. The regime depends on it. Oil rents, subsidies, and insider networks are the glue holding the political system together. Cutting them off would mean dismantling the foundations of power itself. Sanctions actually deepen the problem. By pushing trade into the shadows, they create exactly the kind of opaque environment where corruption thrives. Instead of weakening elite control, sanctions often strengthen it, because only insiders know how to operate in those shadow markets. Iran also lacks the institutions that could push back. Courts, regulators, and the media are either controlled or silenced. Anti-corruption drives appear from time to time, but they usually target political rivals, not the system as a whole. Reformist leaders run into entrenched resistance, and any serious attempt to clean house triggers backlash from the people who profit the most. This is why corruption in Iran isn't just a byproduct of sanctions or bad management. It's the operating system of the state. Oil money, subsidies, and shadow trade routes are deliberately structured to enrich elites and secure loyalty. And the worse the economy gets, the more the regime leans on these corrupt networks to survive. Without a fundamental political shift, corruption will remain the defining feature of Iran's economic crisis. To add to this, in a shocking moment that only poured fuel on the fire, late last year, Iran's president appeared before the cameras and all but threw up his hands. His words were blunt, almost careless. "Whoever thinks they can fix Iran, let them fix it. I cannot." It was not a call for reform. It was a surrender. And as if that was not bad enough, even the central bank governor resigned after the rial collapsed. It was a move that signaled just how broken the system had become. For many Iranians, it felt like the officials responsible for the crisis were walking away from the wreckage they created. The same people who siphoned off oil money, enforced corruption, and crushed dissent were now shrugging off responsibility. To a population that was already furious, this was the final insult. It was the architects of the mess admitting defeat, while the country they broke was left to bleed. The truth is, systems like this can only hold together for so long before people hit a wall. In Iran, that wall has finally been shattered, and the anger has spilled into the streets. What started as frustration over fuel prices, food shortages, and unpaid wages quickly turned political, because everyone knows where the money went and who pocketed it. That is exactly what is happening right now. Since late December, the protests have turned streets into battlefields. Besieged militias charge crowds with batons and tear gas, while Revolutionary Guard snipers take positions on rooftops. People scatter under live fire, only to regroup again, chanting against the Ayatollah, even as bodies fall. The death toll has climbed into the thousands, and tens of thousands more have been injured or detained. Morgues are overflowing, and families search desperately for missing relatives while prisons burst at the seams with anyone who dare to raise their voice. To contain the anger, the regime is cutting off the country from itself. Internet blackouts sweep across provinces, silencing communication and isolating communities. Analysts estimate that less than 1% of the population is connected. Activists who try to bypass the blackout with Starlink connections are hunted down, their homes raided, equipment seized, and arrests carried out in the dead of night. Even so, footage still leaks out, proof that defiance refuses to die. The Ayatollah looks cornered. Rumors swirl that he has left Tehran under heavy guard, while cracks spread through the system he built. The protests continue, despite live fire and arrests, showing the regime that fear no longer works. People know the economy has collapsed, and they know corruption drained the coffers, and they know oil money went to the elites and the foreign militias instead of ordinary families. And this violence is not just political. It is economic too. Strikes have shut down factories, ports have stopped operating, and oil shipments are disrupted. Every blackout, every clash, every day of unrest bleeds millions from state revenues. Tourism has vanished, foreign investment is non-existent, and local businesses are paralyzed. Inflation is accelerating as supply chains break down, shelves empty, and prices soar. The economy is not just weak, it is frozen. Yet, the defiance continues. Protesters march through tear gas and bullets, knowing they might vanish into detention at any moment. They chant against the Ayatollah, against the Guard, and against a system that has failed them. The United States has issued warnings to Tehran, promising consequences if the bloodshed continues, adding international pressure to a regime already staggering under sanctions and domestic unrest. This is a collapse unfolding in real time. The government fires on its own people, the currency is in freefall, and the economy is at a standstill. Oil wealth cannot buy stability anymore. Corruption hollowed out the system, leaving nothing to fall back on. In 2026, the regime is bleeding legitimacy, the economy is bleeding cash, and the people are bleeding in the streets. With the country burning, the question is whether Iran is doomed or if there's any way forward. Truthfully, the outlook is, it's pretty bleak. But there are paths forward if the government acts carefully. Cutting fuel and food subsidies, which swallows roughly $80 billion a year, could free up money for jobs and infrastructure. The challenge is making these cuts without sparking more unrest. Carefully planned cash transfers to low-income families, like those used in Jordan, could soften the blow. Iran tried something similar in 2010. But poor planning made it fail. Tackling corruption is equally urgent. Billions vanish into elite pockets every year, and companies tied to the Revolutionary Guard dominate large parts of the economy. Even small steps, such as public audits or protections for whistleblowers, could begin to rebuild trust and show people that change is possible. Diversifying the economy is another necessity. There are bright spots. Tech startups in Tehran grew by 20% in 2023, proving that innovation can survive even under pressure. Agriculture, petrochemicals, and mining could all generate revenue if they received more investment and fewer bureaucratic obstacles. Tourism has enormous potential as well. Historic sites like Persepolis and Isfahan could draw millions if sanctions eased. These industries show what Iran could achieve, but right now they're too small to stabilize the entire economy. Foreign policy plays a critical role. The 2015 nuclear deal offered a glimpse of how quickly relief can change the picture. Inflation dropped, tourism surged, and frozen assets were unlocked. But the US exit in 2018 and stalled negotiations since 2024 have left Iran isolated again. China, Russia, and Turkey still buy Iranian oil, but they cannot replace Western markets. As long as Tehran funds foreign proxies and remains in conflict with its neighbors, sanctions remain in place, and the relief Iran needs will stay out of reach. The obstacles are enormous and interconnected. Hardliners fear reform will weaken their grip on power. Sanctions are tightening, tensions are rising, and cities are crowded with refugees, including more than 5 million Afghans. Poverty is deepening, and if the economy worsens, more Iranians could flee, creating instability across the region. Protests are unpredictable. They might force change, or they could trigger harsher crackdowns. But either way, the human toll is already staggering. Even under this pressure, Iran shows flashes of resilience. GDP grew 0.3% in 2025, and a modest rebound of 1.1% is projected for 2026, mostly from oil and petrochemicals. Small businesses and startups continue to operate despite enormous challenges, showing that the economy still has some underlying strength. Yet the risks remain very real. Iran's oil, its strategic location, and its influence in the region means this crisis will not stay contained. Gas prices, trade, and security across the Middle East and beyond are directly affected by how Iran navigates this period. Years of oil dependence, corruption, and isolation have pushed Iran to the edge. Families are struggling to survive. Young people face dead-end futures. Villages are emptying. And cities are buckling under the pressure. Protests are growing louder, and the government is trapped between reform and repression. The people have shown they will not stay silent forever. Every day brings a choice. Continue squeezing the population until something snaps, or find a way, however difficult, to give the people a future worth living. What happens next will not just decide the fate of Iran, but the stability of the region and the lives of the millions who are watching, hoping, and still refusing to accept this as normal.